Most black people perceive the white society's colonization of us as being something that was done to our ancestors. This perception causes us to always discuss the issue of colonization as being a past tense issue. However, the white society never actually stopped colonizing the minds of black people. The white society's colonization of the minds of black people is being systematically reapplied and reinforced unrelentingly. It's how white oppressive forces keeps the black masses mentally enslaved. Proof that millions of black people remains mentally enslaved is made clearly evident by the fact that we now have countless millions of black people walking around all day long with computers in their pockets, which provides them with access to unlimited verifiable information. Yet they insist on to holding on to the mental enslaving lies that were brutally beaten into the minds of our ancestors. Millions of black people have no interest whatsoever in learning what is actually true and are contented with holding on to information brutally imposed upon our ancestors by their invaders and their enslavers. In fact, millions of black people now fiercely fight to defend the lies that our ancestors fiercely fought to resist. So in a sense, we are fighting against our own ancestors. This sad truth is clear evidence that millions of black people are mentally enslaved by the white society. Mental slavery is the worst form of slavery because it gives you the illusion of freedoms. It makes you trust, love, and defend your oppressors while making enemies of those of your people who are trying to free your minds. This is the plight of far too many black people. Marcus Garvey said a declaration that we are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others could free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. He said, mind is your only ruler sovereign. The man who is not able to develop and use his mind is bound to be the slave of the other man who uses his mind. That's a quote from Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey's quote became much more popular when Bob Marley used it and turned it into a song lyrics of a song called Redemption Song, where he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. That quote is known and is often stated by millions of Africans throughout the diaspora. There is in fact neither a struggle nor fight more important for black people today than the emancipation of our minds from white mental slavery. However, the reason why we haven't been able to emancipate our minds from white mental slavery is because most of us have a flawed understanding of it. That flawed understanding has kept all of our liberating strategies flawed. One of the gravest misconceptions that black people makes is that the white society's colonization of black people is a past tense occurrence. Moreover, that our current collective mental enslavement is one caused because our ancestors were colonized and that those lies embedded within their minds were subsequently passed down to us, through generational lines to us. Yes, it is indeed true that when the immoral white barbarians invaded, colonized, and enslaved their ancestors, they indoctrinated many mental enslaving lies into their minds in order to prevent dissent and rebellion from rising amongst them. And it's also true that many of those mental enslaving lies were then subsequently passed down onto our current generation. But this alone is not how they keep our minds presently colonized and mentally enslaved. The colonizing of people's minds is not a one-step treatment process. It actually requires constant reapplication and reinforcement in order to remain effective. If the colonization process isn't being reapplied and reinforced upon the minds of the oppressed, its effectiveness would lessen each new passing generations as we move further away from the initial colonization of our ancestors. Here's why. The initial reason why the white society colonized our ancestors was to manipulate them to think in ways that protect the interests of the white society and that places the needs of the white society above their own. However, people always eventually returns to thinking in ways that serve their own collective interests. It's the inherent natural self-preservation response within the group psychology and within the human psyche. This this is why if the white oppressors relied solely on the colonization process that was done to our ancestors in the past, it would not be enough to keep our current generations mentally enslaved, because our inherent response would make us start looking out for our own interests. Therefore, to keep the collective minds of black people thinking in ways that serves the white society, aka in ways that keep us mentally enslaved, the colonization process is being secretly, constantly reapplied and reinforced directly upon the minds of each new generation of black people outside of our awareness. They've got us looking at the past colonization of our ancestors so that we don't realize that they're still colonizing us today. The ongoing colonization of black people is being done with such immense sophistication that it's not easily detectable, nor easily understood, or even comprehended by its current black victims. Presently, white government agents that specialize in psychiatry and propaganda analyzes and studies everything about the black population, our beliefs, our likes, our dislikes, our strengths, and our vulnerabilities. These surveillance information is gathered and decisions are then made on which best fraudulent stories to produce to best create certain psychological feelings amongst the black population that assist the white society in maintaining their social dominance over us. Through this current colonization process, the white man holding the whip has been replaced by a team of white social scientists and white propagandists. And the actual whip has been replaced with psychological warfare propaganda campaigns that are being fed unrelentingly into the collective minds of black people. You know, when comparing the modern sophisticated colonization process now being used against black people to the more brutal methods used in the past against our ancestors, one could say that the methods used upon our ancestors had a GED, and that the methods being used against us today has a PhD. It's now covertly achieved through repetitive subliminal messaging propaganda campaigns that are being systematically fed into the collective minds of black people. Subliminal messages works by communicating directly with the subconscious mind without the individual's awareness. It manipulates the subconscious minds of black people without our conscious mind being aware of what's happening to us. The repetitive, recurring, core subliminal message being conveyed to black people is that we are our own worst enemies and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This propaganda campaign is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these noticed subliminal messages from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming messages, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. This is the true reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasian in spite of brutal history to the contrary. These thoughts that benefit the white society were deliberately embedded into our minds through media subliminal programming. Don't dispute facts you don't understand for a silly slave syndrome myth you've been misled to believe. Doing so will keep you mentally enslaved by the white society. Our core problem is that most black people are clueless of the fact that our minds are being systematically colonized to think in ways that benefit the white society and in ways that are against our own self-interest through the white society's monopoly over information that are fed into our minds. The colonization process actually begins during our early education development when our minds are young and most impressionable. And then is reapplied throughout our entire life through the unrelenting media subliminal programming. Those black people that do not critically think never notices their mental change. Many black people are afraid to learn the truth because our identity is so deeply connected to the lies. Many black people are also afraid to learn the truth because of the inherent responsibility to do something about it. Therefore, many black people fight against those who try to present truth. Many black people also reject liberating truth, more specifically because for the action that comes with accepting, the call for action that comes with accepting the truth. They therefore instead cling to the biblical fairy tales and the silly slave syndrome niche that keeps us complacent, stagnant, mentally enslaved, and therefore keeps us within the good graces of the white oppressors. When we do this, we become the wardens of our own mental prison. The first step towards freeing your mind from white mental slavery begins with remembering that it's our enemies that are controlling what we believe. Moreover, that these enemies have proven themselves as being the most unethical, diabolical, and most notoriously deceitful group of people throughout history. This is a fact. Whenever such a group as described of people are controlling all of the information that you receive, they'll always feed you lies that align with their notorious, narcissistic, and deceitful racist tendencies. It's the people they are. It's the way they've always been. And it's the only way they know how to be. Through their repeated media subliminal propaganda campaigns that falsely exalts themselves, the white society has given their racial group a favorable image makeover within the collective minds of millions of black people. And the brainwashing has worked so effectively that whenever we black people are awakened, speak candidly about the white society based upon the accurate history shared between our racial groups and themselves, those brainwashed black people often present the question asking us, what do you have against white people? Why you don't like white people? And they will insist that it is our own people that are now our own worst enemies. They are totally clueless of the fact that their minds have been subliminally brainwashed to think in ways that serve the white society. Our core problem is that the brainwashed ones are so stubbornly brainwashed that they fiercely fight against those of us that try to free their minds. Therefore, before we can confront the system of white supremacy, we're forced to fight against our own people they brainwashed to defend it. FYI, they no longer call the mental enslavement process colonization, okay? Because we black people, we become highly cognizant of that word. Therefore, white social scientists have renamed the process socialize. They describe socialize as when the oppressors exploit their monopoly over information that are fed into the minds of the oppressed to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the white oppressors. What we call mental slavery and we call colonization, white social scientists call socialize and socialization. White social scientists describe this nefarious practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of the oppressed that makes the oppressed adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the dominant culture. Those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental chains. The African slaves of the 21st century are those who cannot break their minds free from the white society's socializing process. Don't be fooled. If Caucasians were truly superior, they wouldn't have to distort so many facts to perpetuate their superiority, and they wouldn't have to work so hard to handicap those who they claim are inferior. I've never seen a group work any harder against the interests of a people that they deem as inferior. It's because they secretly know that the truth is the opposite. Fortunately, some of us are born with a spiritual immune system. It's the gift of spiritual insight that allows us to see through the white society's maze of mental enslaving lies. That spiritual insight shows us the reality that others are oblivious to. Throughout generations, our ancestors have always provided us with those they've given the spiritual insight to see through the oppressor's maze of lies and confusion. Those of us bestowed with this gift are inherently responsible, has an inherent duty to teach those of us who don't have this gift. This is why those who know must teach. If you listen to the things I've said to you, I use critical thinking. I use intelligence. I'm speaking based upon facts, The things I say are facts of how, the history of Caucasians. All facts. If critical thinking makes you uncomfortable, if speaking facts makes you uncomfortable, if speaking intelligent makes you feel uneasy, it's because you are mentally enslaved by lies. Your mind has been turned away from what is truth. And that's why truth seems strange to you. And you believe so many idiotic things and you hold on to them. You have been socially engineered to think in ways that serve the white society. It is now time to wake up and understand the truth of our plighted condition. Those who know must teach. One love and peace, my brothers and sisters. One love and peace.